We'll go over it in 10 minutes or so. If you have this, why don't you bring it up to me? Right there?
You just go ahead and start.
Yeah, you can start.
Shoes are dirty. Yeah, I wore them to work. The kitchen is slippery in a Mexican restaurant.
It's a Mexican restaurant.
Hey,
No.
Okay, did I get all of these? Okay, you're doing this by yourself, guys, and then we're talking. We'll go over these in, let's say, 10 minutes. Ben, you didn't have any of these to do, did you? Finish up?
Nope.
Okay. Here. We'll work on this.
And just write right down the bacon circuit.
John? Here, do you have any of these, John? Did you have to finish something? Yeah. We're working on it right now for 10 minutes. You can just circle it directly. Okay. It's kind of like what we're doing. Dear Nancy.
Yeah, there is no 60. You notice it's after 59. Let's go over this. If you didn't get done, don't sweat it. That was 10 minutes. You will start getting quicker. Remember, the ACT seconds per item. So for 13, that gives us about 8 minutes to get this done. I gave you 10, maybe 9, so we're getting there. But eventually I will kind of keep this close to the actual time. What I want to do right now is, as we go through this, point out some categories, because you'll start to see that these questions, they get predictable, because there are only so many categories that the ACT uses. And when you've got a vocabulary question, you'll be able to see right away that it's a vocab. It doesn't say, it's not labeled vocab, but you can tell what they're testing for. And it seems sort of overwhelming right now, especially because I had you just do an ACT practice test. It seems like it's all over the board. Like you're looking at every punctuation to vocab, to organization, to reading comprehension. But there's a limited number of categories. And as you get used to it, it gets easier, because you can kind of figure out what they're after. Okay. Number 46, and let's just do this. We'll just move around the room. You tell me what you think it is, and I'll talk about most of these. Number 46, Charlie.
H.
H. We're going to put with an animal helper after the word work. Good. With an animal helper, that's a phrase. It's a prepositional phrase. It's a modifier. So what we have here is a misplaced modifier. This is a common type of question on the ACT. And all that means is you got a phrase that's in the wrong spot. Phrase, or maybe it's a single word, but it modifies something. This does not modify the shaman. It modifies finding and working with an animal, right? With an animal helper, it's describing finding and working. That's what we mean by the term modify. Okay. Number 47, John.
C.
C is good. It's not R, which a lot of people want to put, but it is, because it's only one. This is an agreement question. Subject, verb, agreement. So here's what's going on in number 2. In Worldwide Folk Story, the younger son or daughter was sent out into the wild. It's one or the other, it's not both of them. So if it was an and between son and daughter, yeah, we'd leave it like it is. It would be an R.
Do you want us to correct or just leave as is?
I'll correct it. I'm going to let you guys keep this, but you might want to refer to it later. So you can just double underline the correct, identify somehow the correct. Okay, Amy, how about number 48?
No change.
No change. Good. This is just a basic spelling, kind of a punctuation question. Keaton, how about 49?
No change again.
No change again. This is how the ACT measures vocab, test for vocab. Okay, there is no vocab section. It'll just pick a word and give you other choices, right? Enable is the one that works best there. Okay, Nick, how about number 50?
J.
J, good. Place with animals after associated. This looks a lot like number 46, right? It should. And misplaced modifier again. Okay, how about number 51, Lena?
D.
How do you say your name?
Going.
Aline. Okay, I'm sorry. Aline. D, good. His. Let's see. While St. Kevin of County Wicklow offers his hand as nest. Yeah, and there's an agreement one also. It's kind of a simple one. We don't want the is. Let's talk about this real quick though. Let's say that it wasn't St. Kevin of County Wicklow, but it was an animal of some kind. And so we did want the word its in that spot. Which its do we need? There's 2 of them, right?
The without apostrophe.
One without the apostrophe. Why without the apostrophe? Because don't apostrophes indicate possession?
That one, it's not saying it is, it's just...
Right. So the word its is sort of it's an exception to the rule. If you have it apostrophe s, it's a contraction. It is. So for the word it, we sort of change the possession rule and just say no apostrophe, just its. Right? But if I say Keaton's, I would put an apostrophe s on the end. So this is a little bit confusing because we're changing a rule in order to accommodate another rule. So its possessive is always without the apostrophe. Okay, 52, Trent.
J.
J. Now this one is H. Okay, so we look at this sentence. The author wishes to add the following sentence in paragraph 1. Rather, they concern a total understanding of, okay. As soon as I see the word rather, and you guys will pick up on this after today, because I'm going to give you a PowerPoint on semicolons and colons. Rather is one of those words that introduces a sentence. It's a transition, and it almost always comes right after a semicolon. So if we look at where they want to put it, at the end of the last sentence with a semicolon after animals. These stories have little to do with kindness to animals, semicolon. Rather, they concern a total understanding of it and attunement. So you can do this by punctuation. Also, the meaning of the sentence, you can tell it's a contrary idea to some other idea in the sentence. So it makes the most sense after that last sentence. This is kind of reading comprehension also. Punctuation and reading comprehension. The reading comprehension ones are going to be the toughest because they take the most time. Like you have to kind of figure out, you have to test it and put it in different places in the paragraph. And that can eat up a lot of time. That's one thing you don't want to do too much of in the ACT is waste time. Okay, number 53, there's another reading comprehension. Nick Stites?
C.
No, this one's D. So the only two that we've missed so far are both reading comprehension. How many else, who else missed 52 or 53? Okay. The main idea of paragraph 1 is best stated as, in shamanic folklore, people often gain an understanding of the animal world through animal teachers rather than just learning the lesson to be kind to animals. So you needed to have a sense of what the whole passage was about. 2 days ago, Tuesday, I said, rather than look at the question and just go to the text and try to figure it out, you need to read the whole passage through. That would be one reason to do it, because you want to have a sense of what the whole thing is about. Okay. Isaac, what did you do for 54? Did you do J? J, intensely. This is another vocab. Remember, this is the only way that we pick out vocab from this test. The word profoundly is used here to mean intensely. You can do this by elimination. Eerily, obviously, it should mean that, right? Uneasily, shallowly. They're giving you some choices that are pretty far off of the meaning of the sentence. So, J. And sometimes, this particular vocab question is not that difficult because you're probably familiar with it. But later on, if you guys made it to number 57, there may be some words in there that you don't know what they mean at all. So you got to do some guessing. 55, Chris.
D.
D, us. Good. This is an agreement question again. Now, when I say agreement, I'm going to have you guys look at a video over the weekend. But agreement just means that the subject or some word agrees with the verb. So, he walk, right? That doesn't agree. We want an S on the end to make the two agree. He walk. So you do this intuitively. You guys know in your heads subjects and verbs generally. There are some rules like this either or, where it makes it singular. So you need to know some specific rules about agreements. That's what we'll talk about. The other kind of agreement is pronoun and antecedent. Where pronoun is just something that stands in place of the noun, like he, she, those are just basic person pronouns. She, referring to Amy, right? Amy would be the antecedent. She would be the pronoun. So we want to make sure that if something else shows up regarding Amy or she, that it agrees, that it's not a plural or something other than what would agree with she. She walks. Her would agree with she. It'll get clear when you see the PowerPoint. We'll go over this the next time on Tuesday. We talk about verbs and agreement. Okay, number 56. Where are we? Where are we going? Ben. F. We don't need to change here. Good. Life forms, comma, which are extraordinary therapeutic. Semicolons, colons do different things. Period, hopefully, that should be obvious that it's not there because you don't want a brand new sentence right there. 57, back to you, Charlie.
A.
A, good, no change. Which phrase best expresses the idea that we are part of heaven? Okay, so you need to know some of these terms or at least have an idea. Heretical connection. What word do you see there in heretical? A theological word.
Paradigm?
heretic, heresy, all of those are bad things, right? So you don't want that, because whatever we're looking for, being part of heaven, should be positive, should be good. So that one's not going to work. Edenic separation. Edenic, well, that might have something to do with heaven, right? The word Eden's in there. But separation's not good. We don't want separation. Earthly spirit, that has nothing to do with any of this. So the last one left is paradisal interconnection. Even though it's not the phrase I would choose to put in there, this is two big, long, unnecessary words. It is the right answer. It's the one that matches most closely. Okay, 58, John. No, this one is H. Remain as the start of paragraph 3, because it begins a new idea, the regulation of our destiny. Again, that's the reading comprehension. Those tend to be toughest. Number 59 is an organizational question. The author wants to add the following sentences. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Where would it best fit in?
B.
In paragraph 3, because it gives examples of how human destinies are regulated by animals. Remember 58, we introduce the idea of the regulation of our destiny. So now we're getting into some pretty deep reading comprehension. This is what the overall passage is about. As you strategize when you're sitting down to take your ACT, you're going to want to know, and you'll know this by the end of this class because you'll see it a bunch of times, but those harder time conditions tend to be at the end of each of the reading passages. Okay? So you want to take advantage of time up front. Don't spend a whole lot of time on simple agreement or vocab type questions. Give yourself a little bit more time for the reading comprehension and organizational ones. Okay, you can put these away. I do have a 3-hole punch. If you want to punch it, you can do it. You might keep that right here. As you get your notebooks out, once you've done that, we're going to take a few notes today. Nobody said anything about the tent in the room. Anybody notice there's a tent in the room?
Let's go with the wrap from the tent.
That's where that came from. I thought you really brought it yourself. I don't know you very well, Nick, so. Okay. Yeah, I think this stuff's going to be gone next week. In fact, I might even change rooms next week because I don't like the old-fashioned chocolate. I don't know how to write the chocolate. Okay, so go to a clean spot in your notebook. You can do this in pencil or pen. I like taking notes in pen. Smoother. Unless you're left-handed and it messes everything up. You guys see okay to take notes if it's that dark? Now we can crack the blinds a little bit. Okay. The homework that you did dealt with things like commas and apostrophes and brackets and dashes and maybe some other stuff. What I'll try to do, and I couldn't really do this because we were doing the pre-testing on day 1, so I sort of threw you into that material. I'll try to get you some PowerPoints, some teaching that I've done on these things prior to doing it. So if you look at the next section, the Skill Builder 2, it deals a lot with verbs and agreement and what's called case form. So if you go on the blog today, you'll see, but you need to wait probably until the end of the day because it's not up there yet. You'll see videos, YouTube videos, that are basically just PowerPoint presentations like you'll see today that walk you through some of those things slowly. Now you can use your book too. I think the book almost gives you too much information because it includes every rule that covers commas. you don't need to cover every single rule because the ACT is not going to test your knowledge on where you put the comma in a date, for example. It's good to know for your writing and for, for your own knowledge, but as far as we're concerned with the ACT, it doesn't have to be there. A lot of you know that stuff is sort of intuitive. So for what's due on Tuesday, you're going to want to look at the YouTube videos. They're about, I don't know, 8, 10, maybe 12 minutes at the most. And you've got it right there. So if you want to take notes on those, you can stop, take notes, figure it out as you go. No one has emailed me yet, right? Okay, so I'm assuming you're all getting it. Okay, if you don't get it, and you don't want to ask mom or dad, then run it by me. Okay, I am around, I know. Okay, so here we go. These are notes. Now, the reason I'm having you take notes, and you won't always have to take notes, because this is kind of time consuming. We're in crunch time. One thing you need to have before you go to college is the ability to know how to take notes. And the biggest problem with taking notes is trying to write down every single word. Right? The key to writing good notes is looking at a sentence, looking at a paragraph, and getting the key idea. And even using your own shorthand and abbreviation, that's helpful. Anything that can save you time, because a college professor is not going to slow down and stop and wait for you to take notes. Now, those notes are probably posted online, but there will be professors who will require you to take notes and turn those notes in college. So you need to know how to do it. So we're going to go through some common notes. So go ahead and label this next spot, 621 common notes. Commas have one basic job. They have a lot of roles in sentences, a lot of rules. You can tell if you went through the homework, there's a lot of different rules for it. But the main purpose of a comma is to separate. So if I were taking notes, comma notes, they separate. Keep it simple. Get to the point. Okay, so today we're going to walk through the basic and the most common uses of a comma. The first one is items in a series. If you know how to outline, that's a good method to take notes. It can be a little challenging when you have an absent-minded teacher like me. But I think this won't be too hard to outline. So items in a series. And you can have different kinds of items in a series. It's not just nouns. And maybe the first rule that you learned about commas may have been this. When you have a list of things, that's what items in a series means, we separate them by commas. This particular PowerPoint is up on YouTube, and I think if I didn't post it on Tuesday's agenda, I'll make sure I post it today. It's basically just me talking through the same stuff that I'm talking about now. So if you feel like you didn't get the notes down well enough, or you missed some stuff, you can go back to that. Okay, so first we have some nouns. Go buy some bananas, carrots, macaroni, and cheese for lunch. Notice, how many items do we have? Anybody? 4. How many commas do we have? 3. That's what we're going to want to shoot for when we have items in a series. And the items can be nouns like this. You'll see some other kinds of things that it can be. But if you've got 10 items and you're listing them, it wouldn't be a very good sentence to do. But if you had that many, you would have 9 commas. Now, you might run into some teaching that says that that last comma, the one right after macaroni, in this case is optional. Some writers will say that you don't have to have one there. It's called the serial comma because this is a series. I think that it needs to be there because it can avoid confusion. It makes the meaning of the sentence clear. How many items am I supposed to buy? 4. If I say that that comma is optional and I leave it out, how many items might I buy? 3. Right? Bananas, carrots, macaroni, and cheese. Okay, so there are situations where it helps to add that comma. So we'll leave it in. Okay, here we have, you don't need to write these examples down, just so you can see. Here we have phrases. Our government is of the people, by the people, and for the people. Same thing, 3 items, 2 commas. You can also have clauses. What's a clause? Do you know what a clause is? clause is not a phrase. The clause has something that a phrase does not. What does "if I study" have that of the people it doesn't?
Personal.
It's got a subject, right? And it's got a subject. What goes with the subject? Subject and verb. It's got the subject doing something. Subjects and verbs are sort of what make a sentence go. And sentences are made up of clauses. A simple sentence, like "I walked to the store," has one subject and one verb. So any group of words that has a subject and verb working together, that's a clause. Could be an independent clause, could be a sentence all by itself with a period at the end, or it could be part of a bigger sentence like this: if I take notes, if I study, and if I get good sleep. We've got 3 separate clauses there. There's another clause in that sentence. What's the 4th clause? I'll pass, right? Another subject and verb. I've had a long, hectic, tiring day. 3 adjectives together. I could have plugged in an "and" after hectic. Didn't have to. Same rule. So 2 nouns. Okay, so commas can separate items in a series no matter what the items are. Here's a little exception to it. If all the items are joined by a conjunction already, you don't see this a lot, but occasionally you'll see it to emphasize, like "we walked and ran and even crawled to the finish line." Right? That's more dramatic than just using commas between them. Some writers will do that, and you don't need any commas there because what do commas do? They separate, and those "and" separate just fine. Okay. Number 2, we use commas between independent clauses. Those are clauses that can stand by themselves. So if I were taking notes, number 2, independent clauses. If you don't know what a clause is, you might want to stick it in the definition. What's a clause?
As a subject and a verb.
Subject and a verb, good. Group of words with a subject and a verb. If it's independent, you know what the word independent means, right? It stands all by itself. It's independent. So, if we have 2 of those independent clauses next to each other, we got to separate them somehow, right? We can separate it by putting a period between them. I went to the store, I bought a pop. Or we could make it one long sentence by putting in an "and." Now, we're going to add the comma. This isn't an exception to the separation rule. There is a reason why we want it. That's because we don't want to imply 2 things. I went to the store and did something else. That would be another kind of sentence, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. We have 2 independent clauses. Independent, we want to separate them with a comma and a conjunction. Just like you see there. To the store, and I bought a pop. Now, if we take out the "I" in that second one, notice what happens. I went to the store but forgot my money. There's no comma. Because this is just one clause. Remember, to have a clause, you need a subject and verb working together. Right? I went, I bought, in that first sentence. Right? That's 2 clauses. Here we have "I went," then there is no second "I." Instead, what we have here is a compound verb. It's just one verb made up of 2 parts: went and forgot. Okay. Maybe a little bit more complicated than I wanted to get into. If you have 2 independent clauses that can stand alone as sentences, make sure there's a comma between them and a conjunction. Ignore that. What's crossed out? Okay, number 3, non-essential clauses, phrases. Non-essential clauses and phrases. Now, I have a long definition there, but if you think about the term non-essential, that's what it means. It's not essential to the sentence. It's just sort of stuck in there, it's plugged in, you're getting more information, but it's not really absolutely necessary to the grammar of the sentence or to the overall meaning of the sentence. A lot of things do that, right? Commas can do it, like we're going to see in just a second. how else do we plug in information? If you've got a sentence, you want to add a little helpful information, how else could you do it? What other punctuation could you use? Dashes, right? 2 dashes around it, that might work. What else? There's something else, a pair of things that work kind of like dashes.
Parentheses.
Parentheses would work. Those are all parenthetical. Right? That's why we call parentheses, because they're parenthetical. It's just added information. Non-essential means it has information that's not necessary to the overall meaning of the sentence. Think of the commas as parentheses, like these. So commas work like parentheses. Both these sentences are correct, but each has a different meaning. Punctuation depends on the intended meaning. Wow, that's really blurry. What did anybody say? Try again. Is it blurry? No, you can see it. Okay. I think we can make it clear.
Go like that.
Brilliant.
I can see the Dell really well. Ta-da.
Oh.
Better.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Okay, the sophomores who are going on a field trip today are assembled in the on. There's one sentence. Same sentence, same words, but I'm adding some commas. The sophomores who are going on a field trip today are assembled in the on. You can tell by how I read it if there's something different in the second one. How are those 2 sentences different?
In the first one, all the sophomores are going on a field trip, and the second one, just the sophomores are going on a field trip.
I think you got half that right.
All right.
So in the first one, Amy, who's in the on?
Sophomores that are going on a field
Yeah,
trip.
okay. Maybe I got the whole thing right. That's really wrong.
Oh,
So,
okay.
so the sophomores who are going on the field trip are in the on, and only those sophomores. So we can assume that there are other sophomores somewhere else in the building who aren't going on the field trip. That who are going on a field trip today is essential to the meaning. It's defining sort of what that sentence says. If we put commas around it, what we're saying is, here's some added information. This is parenthetical. So, do with it what you want. You can even take it out. So, the sophomores are assembled in the on is what that second sentence says. The sophomores are assembled in the on. Now that sounds very different than the first one. Right? That says that everybody, all the sophomores are in the auditorium. We're just adding, oh, by the way, they're going on a field trip today. Okay, so when we think about those commas as parentheses, that's what I mean, that we're just plugging in some more information. It's just added information. It doesn't change the meaning. If we plug it in and we take out those commas, then we're saying this sentence, the meaning of the sentence is connected to who are going on a field trip today. It's restricting the meaning to just those sophomores who are going on a field trip today. You see how it's different? Let me give you another example. Okay, let's look at these 2. Same structure, same kind of sentence. My sister-in-law living in Houghton Lake is named Vicki. My sister-in-law living in Houghton Lake is named Vicki. Okay, that first sentence, what does it imply about the number of sister-in-laws I may have? It sounds like I've got more than one. And this one lives in Houghton Lake, and maybe I have others in other places. I do, I got a bunch. They're all over Michigan. But my sister-in-law living in Houghton Lake is named Vicki. Now look at the second one. My sister-in-law living in Houghton Lake is named Vicki. It should sound different. That sounds like I've got one sister-in-law. And by the way, she lives in Houghton Lake. So, which one is parenthetical? Second. Let's just insert it in. The first one, we don't want to mess with that. We don't want to separate it. We don't want to put commas around it because it's really defining who my sister-in-law is, that I have one. It's restricted. It's essential. The second one is non-essential. Okay, so when we use the term non-essential, and we're going to run into it a few times, this term, it means parenthetical. It means unnecessary, just stuck in, however you want to put it. We're not going to do page 790, so that's fine. Okay, number 4, We also use commas after introductory elements. These are just things that show up at the front of sentences that aren't the main part of the sentence. We do this all the time. These phrases and even clauses. A mild exclamation. What do we do if it's not mild? How do we punctuate it? An exclamation point, right? It's got its own punctuation. Well, I guess. Oh, look at that. Sure, we can go now. That sort of mild, sort of introductory thing can be offset by a comma. You don't see that in ACT type writing generally because it's a little bit more formal. But in informal writing, creative writing, you might do it. After an intro participial phrase, don't worry about knowing what a participial phrase is, but it might help to know what they look like. Participles are just words that look kind of like verbs because they have ing endings, or they have ed endings, or other kind of verb type endings, but they're acting not as verbs, but as adjectives. Now, what does an adjective do? I don't know if you guys have studied parts of speech or not. It describes what? Not just anything.
Subjects.
Describes things, and right? Like nouns, right? Nouns, not verbs. So adverbs describe verbs. Adjectives describe people or things. Shivering, we stood in the rain. Like shivering is just describing we. Calling for a timeout, the referee whistled. That whole phrase, calling for a timeout, is modifying, describing the referee. Exhausted after the race, I collapsed. So those kinds of phrases at the front, we want to put a comma after. After a long series of prep phrases, use commas. By the light of the moon in September, we harvested the corn. Prepositional phrases, you don't know what your prepositions are. They show a relationship between two things. Like each of these, by the light of the moon in September, those are all prep phrases. One of the things that a prep phrase can modify is a noun. Every prepositional phrase has a noun at the end of it. Therefore, you can connect them onto each other like that. A lot of times that's what we do. We have a string of prepositional phrases. The squirrel on the branch, in the tree, in my yard, next to the driveway. Right? 4 phrases all strung together. When you do that, when you've got a bunch of them at the beginning of the sentence, put in a comma. And this is a judgment call. Like if it seems like I got a lot of words here and I feel like I need to pause, put in a comma. After an intro adverb phrase, if you don't know what that is, think about words that begin, or phrases, clauses that begin with words like when, if, as, while. If the dog barks, let him in. So most of the time that we use words like that at the beginning, you can hear a pause later on. If you start a sentence with the word when, you're going to have a pause somewhere later. When the class ends, I'll tell you your homework. You can hear the pause. So you put a comma. That's kind of a general rule for writing. If you're not going to be keeping track of, as you're writing an essay, oh, this is an intro participial phrase, therefore I'll put a comma in. You probably won't do that unless you're a total grammar dork. I don't even do it, and I am a grammar dork. But you can hear it. Like when you write that, you can kind of hear that. I can tell a comma needs to go in and there's a pause. That's a good rule of thumb for writing. We're not going to do this either. Okay, we're almost there, guys. At least with commas. We got some other stuff to do too. Use commas to offset interrupters. A couple of kinds of interrupters. One of them is called an apositive. An apositive is just a noun that describes or names something else, something that comes right before it. My dog, Skippy, is stupid. Skippy is an apositive, it's just naming the dog. Now I could flip this around, do it differently. Skippy, a dog we got a few weeks ago, is stupid. So a dog we got a few weeks ago was the apositive describing Skippy. You can hear how it's an interrupter. This is almost like a non-essential, like it's sort of added. But an A positive can also be essential, so we want to be careful. We want to make sure that it's a non-essential thing that we're putting commas around. My dog Skippy is stupid, but my dog Fido is not. I have 2 dogs. That's why I want to identify them as Skippy and Fido. It's essential to the sentence. If I put commas around Skippy and around Fido, it would be weird. My dog Skippy is stupid, but my dog Fido is not. It'd be like I'm schizophrenic. I only have 1 dog, but there's 2 of me, so one of them named Skippy and one's Fido. Like it just doesn't work logically. Words used in direct address. Don't sleep under the tire, Skippy. You know I put Skippy in there, Charlie, because I had Hazel in there. I had Hazel. Hazel was a cat we got last year, maybe 2 years ago, and it died. It died like,
That was
I don't know,
easy.
it got hit by a car. It was Daisy. It was Daisy, that's right. You can tell I don't really like my cats. But I would do this in class, and students would ask me, "Is that really, you really have a cat named Daisy?" Like, well, no, we did, but she got hit by a car. And then the girls would be, "Oh, poor Skippy, poor Daisy," and they would get all sad about it. And so I just made a fictional Skippy. I don't have a dog. Yes, Mr. Beals, I'm writing legibly. Mr. Beals is direct address. You're talking directly to me. Right? That's another kind of interrupter. And parenthetical expressions can interrupt. This book, in fact, is overdue. My cat, on the other hand, is very bright. Those little phrases like, on the other hand, by the way, on the contrary, in fact, when they are dropped into a sentence, they usually interrupt. So we want to put commas around. Okay, so ignore that stuff. This is from the high school class. A lot of different reasons for putting commas in. You're gonna find that the ones that show up in writing they're gonna be the same ones over and over again. So as you turn in essays to me and I respond to them and I'm making corrections, you know, it may be that you're using a lot of independent clauses together and not putting the comma into them. Right? It's not like you've got an opportunity to do all of these in every essay that you write. And commas cover a wide range of things. You'll probably find that you just need to work on a couple of them because they're a little bit tricky. The non-essentials, because that's a little bit intuitive. You got to kind of think about what's going on with those. Okay. No, we're not done with those. We still need to do semicolons, dashes, and brackets, but commas was definitely the longest set of notes. Let's do semicolons and colons next. We'll do a break about halfway through, maybe when we're done with these 2 slides. Okay. Semicolon. Everybody know what a semicolon looks like? There you go. Looks like that.
It's a really big semicolon.
Semicolon. I want you to see it, Amy. I want you to see it clear. Semicolon is another kind of separating punctuation. And one way to think about how a semicolon works is it does fall between a period, which is the most separation, or a comma and a comma. It falls between a period and a comma, which is the least amount of separation. And if you look at it, it's got a period and a comma in it. It's kind of a combination of the 2. So that's one way to think about it. So we use a semicolon to separate independent clauses that are closely related, but not already separated by a conjunction. Closely related, but not already separated by a conjunction. This is probably the most common use of a semicolon. There's not a lot of punctuation things that you can do in an essay to impress an ACT grader. But using colons and semicolons correctly is one. Because it does stand out, and it does show that you've got a level of knowledge about punctuation that's beyond the typical 11th grade level. They're not hard to do. Once you get it figured out, they're easy to employ. Here's a couple of examples. The river is rising. It is expected to flood. Okay, two independent clauses, but you can tell by the meaning that they're related to each other. The roads were icy, I had to drive slowly. Now, how else could we punctuate that? We didn't want to use a semicolon.
Can you use so? for the
You can use a conjunction, yep, and then you'd want a comma in there too, right? Comma and a conjunction, that would work. The roads were icy, so I had to drive slowly. The river is rising. What other, we could use another conjunction there. And it is expected to flood. Sure that works. Comma, and. What else could we do? Probably what most of you would do if you were writing those two sentences out.
Period.
A period. The reason you can put a period in and a semicolon in is because we're dealing with independent clauses. Like they stand alone as sentences. But the semicolon does a little bit more than the period does. It suggests to the reader that, hey, this next sentence is coming up, it's related to this one. What I'm going to say about driving slowly is related to the roads being icy. Okay, so it's a little bit more sophisticated than just a period. We can also use a semicolon, or should use a semicolon, by these transitional expressions. I do want you to write down a few of these because odds are pretty good that you're going to see this kind of question on the ACT. We saw one today in the Q set. Remember we had the word rather, began a sentence. We needed a semicolon in front of the word rather. That was the key to picking the right answer. I should probably put rather in that list, but it's a long list. I'm just giving you a few examples there. Just write down 2 or 3. So semicolon between independent clauses joined by a transitional expression like those. And just because you have one of those expressions doesn't mean you have to have a semicolon. Because remember, they could be interrupters. They could drop in. You could stick in a however and just put commas around it, that's fine. But if it seems to be starting a new thought that's following from a previous thought, you need to be thinking semicolon. So if you're ever writing, in fact, or the word however, look to see if it's happening. And it would look kind of like that. One idea, then we have this transition, which gives us an idea of how the next thing is related to it. Like however means that it's sort of opposite to. Sort of like on the contrary. On the contrary and however sort of do the same things. He wants to be a doctor. However, he is also interested in law. And we separate those two things with the semicolon because they're very related, those two sentences. However, in this case, is not just an interrupter that's being dropped in. It's acting like a conjunction. It's transitioning us from one idea to the next. Okay. Number 3, we use it to separate things that already have commas in order to avoid confusion. According to that sentence, guys, how many places are we flying to? Count them up.
9.
9?
Are you sure? Anybody else have a different number?
Oh. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
5. Maybe we got it. We're only flying to 5 places. You want to explain?
It's like saying Lansing, Michigan, a comma in between Lansing and Michigan. So
Because Bogota
Is in
is in
Colombia.
Colombia. Quito is in Ecuador. La Paz is in Bolivia. Cusco is in Peru. So those are, we could write it like that, and that would, technically, that would be correct. But if you don't know your geography, that would be very confusing. And that's much more important when it comes to writing. The meaning and being clear is much more important than being technically right according to the rules. So instead of that, we would do this. Semicolons in between the places. That way we can still have the comma between the city and the country like we're supposed to. But the items in the series are now separated like they're supposed to be. You can see that we go to 5 places. I kind of tricked you because I didn't put Detroit, Michigan. If I had put Detroit, Michigan, I think somebody else would have figured out that it was only 5 places. Okay, so if you've already got a bunch of commas, and it doesn't just have to be places like this. There are a lot of reasons we use commas. You got a bunch of clauses that have interrupters in them. I mean, you could have 3 things in a list, but you end up with 6 commas. That's very confusing. You have to read it very carefully and figure out what the writer means to say. That's not good. You want to have semicolons to help the reader figure it out. It's crossed off. Okay, there's a colon. Colons are a little bit different. There's the most common use of the colon, and that's to introduce a list. Introduces a list. That's an easier way to say it than what I wrote over there. You'll see from the example, independent clausing is important. Just because you have a list doesn't mean you have a colon. We've seen a few sentences, right, with items in a series with a list of things. There are no colons in it. So it's got to be a very specific use. The meal comprised 5 courses. That's an independent clause. I could put a period there and say, they were appetizer, salad, vegetable, entree, and dessert. That would work. But why do that when I can just put a colon in and then give the list? So the colon suggests to the reader, and here it is. And here's the stuff we ate. Here's my list. The meal comprised 5 courses, and here they are. And then I list them. Okay, so you want to make sure that you've got a complete sentence at the front of the colon. You're going to use it like that. As follows, or the following is used for breakfast, we ate the following. Pie, ice cream, cake, donuts, and candy. It's some breakfast. Crash by 10 o'clock. If the lists are complements, don't use colon. Okay, let me explain this because you probably don't know what complements are. After sentences are made up, you got these basic parts, right? And there are 3 basic parts to the sentence. You have subject, verb, complements. Complements just sort of complete the verb. Like, I ate salad. Subject, verb, complement. If you just have a list of things, you don't need a colon. Like in this case, the meal comprised appetizer, salad, vegetable, entree, and dessert. There's nothing wrong with that sentence. That's how we want to write it. You don't need a colon because you don't want to have something like as follows in there. There's no suggested list. It's just, this is part of the sentence. Right? Like I said before, we've seen a number of these list type sentences. You don't need a colon. If it said the meal comprised a lot of stuff, then you'd want a colon if you're going to list it. The colon always suggests the list is coming, or as follows. For breakfast, we ate pie, ice cream, cake, donuts, and candy. There's nothing wrong with that. You don't need a colon, it's just a list. So the clause before the colon has to be independent. Is that one number 2? I thought I gave you a couple. That doesn't count? No, okay, I guess that was just a long explanation. Okay, number 2. Before a long formal statement or quotation. The only time you run into this is when you do lengthy writing, like research writing, which we're not going to do in this course. If you take the writing course in the fall that I'm teaching, you probably will run into the colon use here. Sorry, we'll talk a little bit more about how to go backwards. So if I'm quoting an author, I'm writing a paper, and I've got to bring in some authors because I'm talking about different topics. And I quote the author real long, a long passage. It's more than just a sentence or 2. I want to introduce it with a colon. You really need to see that in the form, and I don't have it, unfortunately, to show you. But like I said, you're not going to have to worry about it this term. We use a colon between independent clauses when the second explains or clarifies the first. Now this one's a lot like the semicolon rule, where you've got 2 independent clauses. with no conjunction. And a lot of times you can interchange them. You can choose to put a semicolon there, or you can put a colon as an example. I hope we have an example. This car has some great features. It's reliable, powerful, and fuel efficient. It's reliable, powerful, and fuel efficient is an independent clause, right? I could write that as a sentence. I could capitalize the I in its, put a period at the end, it would be fine. But I want it to be more than fine, right? I want it to be more sophisticated. So instead of the period after features, I'll put in a colon. The second thing is really explaining and clarifying first. How else could we write that sentence and use a colon? Let's say I wanted that second clause, instead of to be a clause, to be a list of things. What could I change? How could I tweak it to make it work? Colon.
Could you say this car has some great features, reliability, power, and fuel efficiency?
Yeah. Turn them into nouns and make it a list. That would work. Okay, and then finally, and I'm assuming you'll know how to use these colons in certain conventional situations. Like when you write out time, right, you put a colon between the hour and the minute. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that today. Bible chapter and verse, between title and subtitle, that might be new. After the salutation of a business letter, formal business letter, instead of a comma after Dear Bob, it's Mr. Smith, colon. Did I get that? Got some of you, I'm sure. Okay. Let's stop taking notes. You can just listen to this last one. Dashes and brackets. Okay. I've said the word parenthetical a lot, and I've talked about it, so I probably don't need to spend a lot of time on it now. Words or phrases that break into the main thought of a sentence. The key thing about parenthetical that we want to remember is that it can be removed, and it doesn't change the meaning of the sentence. That's sort of the test for whether or not something is parenthetical or non-essential. So it can be yanked out, and it doesn't change basically what the sentence is saying. There's several kinds of punctuation that can be parentheticals. We've seen how commas can be parenthetical, right, when it's non-essential, or an interrupter, like in this case. I, however, have a better idea. Parentheses can do it. Use parentheses to enclose informative or explanatory material. So if it's strictly just information, like page 19, you probably wouldn't use dashes there. Dashes are a little bit more informal, but parentheses work. Eleanor Roosevelt, 1884 to 1962, was first lady during the Great Depression. Right? The factual information of the dates when she was alive, that would be parenthetical. I wouldn't put that in. Whereas a lot of these parentheticals are interchangeable, like you can do dashes. Like the exercises you may have noticed, you could put dashes or parentheses around a lot of these things. It wouldn't matter either way because they kind of do the same thing. So there will be some overlap. But with strictly factual information, we want to use parentheses. A parenthetical sentence within another sentence, this is an example, does not need a first capital letter or period. Okay, so that example, that sentence up there, I don't have a capital T on this because I've got the capital A at the beginning. I don't have a period after example because we have a period after the word period. But if we were to take that and stick it on the end, like this, then you do want to treat it like a separate sentence. It's still parenthetical, it's still added information, but we capitalize the T and we put a period there. Okay, dashes, these indicate the beginning and end of an abrupt break in thought. Abrupt break in thought. The meeting, I forgot to tell you, was postponed. Mark Twain, did you know he was a riverboat pilot? He wrote The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Now for that first one, what else could we do there instead of dashes? No, not count. Is it plugged in? It's just plugged in, right?
Parentheses.
Parentheses. I like dashes better. It's a little bit more informal. But parentheses would work. We also use a dash for this suggestion. That is, namely, or in other words. We own 2 cars, namely, a minivan and a truck. Notice there's no second dash. The only time you need a second dash is when it's that abrupt break in thought and it's in the middle of a sentence. Okay, if it comes at the end, you don't need the dash, which is a little bit weird because parentheses also come in pairs, but you never just see one parenthesis, right? You always see the other. There's always a pair. Dashes, I don't know. We're just not going to put a dash here. It would look kind of strange, right? Put a dash right there, sort of outside of that period. The weather was warm in the 70s for November, right? We could offset that with parentheses too, that'd be fine. The ACT people like dashes. You're almost guaranteed to see a dash sort of sentence with question on the ACT. I said that already. Okay, we're done? No. Oh, brackets, I forgot about brackets. Brackets are parentheses. We just need to think about them interchangeably, but they're used in specific situations. We use it within parentheses that already exist or quoted material. So if we look at this sentence, imagine this is a sentence that I'm writing in my research paper. So I'm going to quote some guy who's talking about these countries. He stated the 2 nations, North and South Korea, are in negotiations now. So I've written that sentence in my paper. And I realized I'd like my reader to understand that the 2 nations that this guy's quoting are North and South Korea. So I'm going to stick in that information. Does that make sense? Like I'm sticking in information of another guy's quote. So I'm messing with another guy's quote. I've got to be very careful. When you're quoting somebody, it's got to be word for word. So to show that it's my addition into the sentence, I'm going to use brackets. So I put North and South Korea in brackets. If I put it in parentheses, what am I suggesting?
That he said it.
That he said it, exactly. And somehow he said it in a way that sounded parenthetical, so that's how they quoted it. But if it's me adding it, I want to make sure I do it in brackets. So that makes sense. I mean, that's a good use of a bracket. Here's another one. The Supreme Court overturned the ruling, and then I have a parenthetical. See page 49, and then I realize, oh, I want to put this in parentheses also, diagram A, but it's a parenthetical inside the parenthetical. Well, that's going to look weird. I've got parentheses inside parentheses. It's like we don't put double quotes inside double quotes, right? What do? Single quotes inside double quotes. It's just a way of helping the reader to see what's going on. So that's all we're doing here. So diagram A is a parenthetical, but because it's already inside of one, we're going to put it in brackets. Okay? Brackets are pretty simple because those are the only 2 times we use them. Yay. Okay, we're done with notes. We're not done with PowerPoint though, because we got to talk about the ACT essay. Let's take a break right now. Guys, take me back here at 5:02, or we'll resume at 5:02, which is about 13 minutes. Okay? You want to go outside? Go outside. I think I don't know, go swing on the swing or something. I don't know, kind of like on there.
You said 5 after?
No, 5:02.
Oh.
5:02.
Yeah.
looks like a different
It's
chair.
still recording. Oh, no, it's not. Yes, it is.
No, it has a little voice on it. Oh, it is. You do something for all the kids that are gonna watch it at home.
Oh, it was during this whole break.
What?
It was during this whole break.
Charlie, we just let that run, right?
I didn't touch it.
It's still recording.
Which is fine, right? We just want one video. We don't want multiple videos. You're gonna chop this up for me?
Brilliant.
You can't get in.
You took my water.
This side.
Yeah.
That's mine.
Where'd I go then?
Okay, children, get this out. Andrew. We're gonna go over all the exercises, but not every item. Remember your exercise? Okay, so page 61, is everybody back? We started off with end mark punctuation, like period, question mark, exclamation marks. But some of the items that they had in the exercise on page 62 were quotes, which required you to do some other things like add quotation marks. So there's a little bit more going on than just the instructions indicated. There's some things I don't really like about this book. That's one of them. So I'll try to read ahead when I can to give you a heads up on things like that. I'm not always going to do it. Some of you are just going to stumble across yourself. You're also approach. You can figure it out though. Okay. Number one. Let's start at this side. Ben, what are we doing with number one? Just tell me where I'm putting different punctuation things.
Quotes around how happy I am, right? And then period after am and after bride.
Okay, period after bride, yes, but we don't want a period after the am. What do we want there? Before the closing quote, Nick? Comma. So, how happy I am, actually, no, we don't even want a comma there, sorry, it's not a comma. What's the tag, what's the verb?
Exclaim.
Exclaim. So, Nick, what do we want there? If she exclaimed it.
It's going to be a exclamation.
Right. So, how happy I am, exclamation point, quote, exclaim the bride. Exclaim stays lowercase, just like it is, all one sentence. Okay, how about number 3, Chris?
Quotes around is anyone at home?
Yep.
And then a question mark in the end.
A question mark, we do need a question mark, but it's not at the
Sorry,
very
a
end.
question mark at the end of is anyone at home, and then exclamation mark in the end.
Oh, wait. Okay, let's look at the word home. The end of the quote, it is a question, Chris, but Arlene shouted. So one of those is going to take precedence.
Say both.
You could do both. You could do just an exclamation point. Where does the quote go, though? The closing quote in relation to that.
Before Arlene and after home.
Okay, what about, okay, so we've got home. Let's say you put an exclamation point in. Where does the quote go? The closing quote.
After the exclamation point.
After the exclamation point, right. And then just a period after shouted. A lot of moving parts to quoted material, depending on where the question is the quote a question or is the whole sentence a question? Or sometimes it's both. So do you have 2 question marks? So we'll just work through these as we run. Number 5, I simply loved it, Lisa exclaimed about the film. I simply loved it, Lisa exclaimed about the film. Okay, so this is exclamation also. Trenton, what'd you do with 5?
Exclamation. And the quotes, I simply loved it. Exclamation point, quote. Lisa exclaimed about the film. Period.
Good. Did we get that? Let's jump down to number 9. Not real tricky, but there's an item in there that I wanted to hit. Nick, what'd you do with 9?
It's all quoted. And then question mark again.
We don't need a quote. The reason we're not going to put quotes around it is because there is no indicator that it's a quote. There's no dialogue tag or anything. There's no like he said, or she exclaimed. So we can just treat it like a sentence. So assuming that it's just a sentence, what did you say we do at the end?
Question mark.
Question mark at the end. There's one comma that needs to be added
After ballerina.
after ballerina. Good. Okay, how about number 10, Keaton?
How silly it is for you to fight for first place! Exclamation points.
Sure. What else could we put there?
Comma after is. How silly it is, comma.
No, you don't need it there. But I think you could end it differently. If you didn't want the exclamation point, it would depend on how much emphasis you wanted on the sentence. If you didn't want the exclamation point, what would you put there?
Period.
Period, like just as a statement. Okay, Nick, how about 12?
This order must be completed immediately. Just probably an exclamation point at the end.
Sure. Or?
A period.
Period. I'd lean towards an exclamation just because it sounds like it's
Yeah.
important, it's being emphasized. How about 14, Aline?
I forgot with the exclamation.
Did you just put the exclamation at the end?
Yeah.
I think we need to put it somewhere else.
After the Q.
Yeah, and then just a period at the end. The tricky thing about that sort of sentence is you're almost never going to write it. Unless you're writing dialogue, like you're writing fiction, you're not going to run into anything where you're going to have to know that the exclamation comes after the cue. Okay. Amy, number 17.
Is it you bet comma I can, or is it just you bet I can exclamation point? I wasn't totally sure on that one.
That would depend on how you said it. If you want it to be, you bet I can, that's actually 2 separate sentences.
So it could be a semicolon or a period or nothing.
Sure, you do a lot of different things. You bet I can. I would read it like that, like it's one, you bet I can.
Okay.
So what'd you do? What do you do with you bet I can?
Nothing and then an exclamation point at the end or a period.
Yeah, period or exclamation. So we're seeing a lot of gray areas with this punctuation. Like you can make a judgment call on whether or not you want it to do what you want it to do, and it just depends on emphasis and preference, how you read that particular sentence. Now these are very informal sentences, so that's the case for informal type, right? We're talking about specific rules. There may not be a lot of will. But even in the comma stuff and in the brackets and dashes material that we went over, you can see that there are a number of places where you can make a judgment call as to whether or not you use parentheses or dash, or whether or not you include a comma. Okay, number 9, Charlie. No, we did that one, sorry. Where did we go? Number 18, Charlie.
Did you say there is a pizza for dinner? Question mark.
Yeah, you can do it that way. Just put a question mark at the very end. How else could you do it?
Put a comma after did you say?
Yep. And then what though? If you put a comma there, you're suggesting that you're quoting the person, right? So if you're quoting the person, what else do you need to do?
Put quotes, there's a pizza for dinner.
Yep. And then where's the question mark now? Because the whole thing is a question.
Right after the.
After the closing quote, good. So did you say, comma, there is a pizza for dinner, all in quotes, and the question mark outside that closing quote. One more little thing you need to do, if you decided to do it that way, call it a quote with the word there. What do we need to do with the word there?
Caps.
Capitalize it. beginning of the quotation. Number 19, John.
This sort of good, exclamation point, I mean it, period.
Sure. Or you can do it the other way around too. I certainly did, period. I mean it, exclamation point. Either way, it would depending on how you read that sentence. That one just seemed kind of strange. I had a hard time sort of figuring out what the possible readings were, which is why I circled it. So, okay, moving on. Number 64, page 64. Here you're just showing me where it goes. Let's try to work through these quick. I want to make sure we've got time enough to talk about the essay. Back to you, Ben. Number 3.
Commas after chocolate, pineapple, and
Commas after chocolate and pineapple. Good. Here's sort of an aside, but if there was such a thing as chocolate pineapple cake, how would we indicate that in the sentence?
comma after chocolate.
No comma after chocolate. That would help. There's a way to do it even more clearly than that.
Chocolate and pineapple and vanilla cake.
That'd be confusing. I know what you mean, but I think I would be more confused by that sentence. There's a punctuation piece that we haven't talked about today yet. You could do something with chocolate pineapple. It would make it one thing. Hyphen. Hyphen. Alex made chocolate pineapple cake and vanilla cake. And if you wrote it that way, chocolate pineapple cake needs to be hyphenated. Whenever you have two words together to describe the thing after it, you always hyphenate it. If there really is a cake called chocolate pineapple cake, it should always be hyphenated. And that would fix it here. That would make it clear that there are two kinds of cakes. I'm pretty sure there's not such a thing as chocolate pineapple cake. That sounds gross. So there are 3 cakes. But there, we've covered the hyphen too. Number 5, Chris. Where the commas go?
After Friends and after Romans.
And this one's tricky because this was not items in a series. This is direct address where you're talking to friends, talking to Romans, and talking to countrymen. So you need a comma after countrymen too. Anybody get that right?
Yeah.
They wrote this in a way that would mess you up, but good. All right, how about number 6? This one really is just a plain old list. Trenton?
Which one?
Number 6?
Potatoes, comma, candy, and ice cream are bad for you. Are bad for my weight.
Need one more comma. There's one after potatoes
And candy.
and candy. Good. Number 8, Nick.
My father, comma, a well-known physician, comma, addressed the medical society.
Oh, sorry. I missed twice. Good job, Nick. All right, other Nick. Number 10.
Comma after match.
Good. Keaton, number 12.
Jamie's only 5'8", comma, however, comma, he's an excellent soccer player.
I don't know why they put this one in, but that's wrong. I expect most of you probably have commas around, however. But remember we talked about semicolons and the transitional expressions? This is an example of that. Jamie is only 5'8". That's one independent clause. Now we have another independent clause. However, he is an excellent soccer player. So we separate the 5'8" from however with a semicolon. And then the comma goes after the word however. So if you have that comma after however, good. You're supposed to do commas here. I don't know why they would have you put different punctuation in there that you don't know about yet, but in fact, I think the next 2 sections are colon and semicolon. Okay, jump down to 17. Aline?
It is necessary, semicolon, however, to maintain the width.
Do you really have a semicolon there, or did you just put it in because we talked about semicolons?
I just put it in.
Now this one, you do actually need commas around it because it's an interrupter, but I like how you think on your feet very quickly. She makes quick adjustments. It is necessary to maintain a good weight, right? That's what that whole sentence says. The however is non-essential, it's just plugged in there, it's an interrupter. Okay, 18, Amy.
Helen Hayes, comma, delayed film actress, comma, was 92 years old when she died.
20, John. This one requires quotations. Sorry, you got to add something here too.
Father called comma for midnight.
No, what the father called was be home before midnight. So you can read it, my father said, be home before midnight. Okay, so what do we do in that case? If be home before midnight is what he said, what punctuation do we need to add here? The whole thing's a quote, right? So we need quotes around.
Maybe my father called, comma, quotations,
Good. Be home before midnight is all in quotes. Quote after the period. Again, they're asking us to bring in quotation or punctuation that has nothing to do with commas, but it's good. I mean, if the sentence suggests that something is being said, if there's dialogue involved, then we should be putting in quotes. So we just need to keep our eyes out for that. All right, number 24, Charlie.
After parents and after there.
Commas.
Right.
Good. 27, Ben.
After 23rd.
Good. 28, Keaton.
After Lincoln.
Good. 29, Nick Stites.
After 14.
Yep, and look at that sentence again. Beirut. And after Lebanon. When you have a city and country or city and state inside of a sentence, you put commas around both things. So it'd be Lansing, comma, Michigan, comma, even if it's in the middle of a sentence. It looks a little weird, but that's how you do it. Amy, number 30.
The letter ended, comma, sincerely, yours, my friend.
Okay, now I'm going to treat that like quotes.
What you are.
It sounds like it's
Okay.
directly quoting the letter. So what would we do if it's a quote?
The letter ended, comma, quote, sincerely yours, my friend, period, quote.
Good. We need one more comma
After sincerely.
after sincerely. Good. 32, Nick Montre.
That dress, comma, which has a floral print, comma, belongs to me.
Good. Aline, number 33.
Mrs. Jones, comma, whom I had known since childhood, comma, became a physician.
Good, okay. Number 1 on 65, superfluous punctuation. I like this. They want you to look for superfluous punctuation, so if it's superfluous, you add a U. Why not just do an S? I almost had you do C's and S's just to debug me, but whatever. All right, so C for correct, U for unnecessary.
Ah, I thought it was that's incorrect.
Uncorrect.
Incorrect.
Correct. You go ahead and think that if you want.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Okay, so number 1, just say if it's correct or unnecessary. If you want to say incorrect, for Amy's sake. Oh, John, how about number 1?
You.
No, this is good. I ask you, sir, whether you can trust it. Sir is a direct address. It's interrupting, so we want commas around both sides. Number 2, Chris.
Correct.
Is correct. Number 3, Ben.
Correct.
No. We don't want the last comma after Harriet Lee. Only the last comma should be before the end. They snuck that one in. Number 4, Trent.
Correct.
It is correct. Number 5, Mr. Stites.
Correct.
Yep. 6, Keaton.
Correct.
Yep. 7, Mr. Bontrager.
Correct?
Good. 8, Charlie.
Correct.
Yep. 9, Chris.
Incorrect.
It's incorrect, yes. So what's incorrect about it? It's all punctuation, so if it's incorrect, I'm on incorrect.
Sorry.
If it's incorrect, we need to remove something. So what comma needs to come out? Chris, what comma needs to come out? The comma after I. Yeah, you don't want to separate subject from verb, and that's what we would be doing if we left that comma in. Ben, how about number 10?
I said correct.
No. Look very carefully at it.
It doesn't mean
No, it doesn't need to be after some. Some of the streets, we don't want any separation between the word some and the word of at the very beginning. Ben got bit by the very beginning and the very end of the sentence. All right, 66. Can I get a volunteer to just do all 7? Be quick. Quick and painless for the rest of the class. Thanks, Andrew.
Make no guarantees. Is it ladies and gentlemen, colon?
Good.
Number 2, Sharon took 6 subjects, colon, English, comma, French.
If you just want, you can just tell me the word that comes right before the colon. That'll be even easier.
Okay. Uniform, colon.
Good.
Ordered, colon,
Good.
sir, colon, you, colon, morning, colon.
Wow, that's faster than I can even keep up.
Oh, sorry.
Bring your books with that. Bring your books with you. You colon, good. And 7 was morning, right? Yes, that's good. Okay. So you want to talk about any of those? Most of those were introduced lists. Like number 2, Sharon took 6 subjects. That's an independent clause. And it suggests that we're going to get what those 6 subjects are. That the colon says, and here they are. Here are the 6. Number 5 is a business letter. Most of these are lists, I think. Do we have any separated by independent clauses? I don't see any. Okay, no. All right, almost there. A lot of these. Number 1 on 67. I'm going to run through these myself. John went swimming, semicolon. Matthew played tennis, 2 independent clauses. Number 2, he grew potatoes, onions, carrots, radishes, and beets, but she grew roses, gladioli, tulips. We got a lot of commas there, so semicolon is going to help us separate the 2 groups that have all the commas in it, right? So after the word beets, semicolon. Number 3, semicolon after English, separates independent clauses that are related. Number 4, semicolon after meaning. It introduces or it separates the transitional expression however from the rest of that clause. 5, Eric swept the porch, semicolon, Heidi raked the leaves, semicolon, Chris pruned the bushes. Separates independent clauses. Number 6, I considered taking a new job, semicolon. 7, Michael brought me a sweater, semicolon. Moreover, there's a transitional expression. Number 8, my father, who had graduated from college, couldn't get a job. Semicolon, my mother therefore had to go to work. Separated independent clauses. Same with 9, the word gain and then a semicolon. And 10, same idea, quietly and a semicolon. So the most common use of a semicolon turned out to be the most common reason for these 10, right? Which is separating independent clauses that are closely related. You're not using a conjunction. Okay, dashes. Somebody give me 1 through 5. Tell me where the dashes go. Keaton, thank you. Number 1.
After have.
Good. Number 2.
After prevented and for by.
Good. So I always thought so is the parenthetical. Okay, number 3.
After style and before one.
Good. 4.
After 3 and before because.
Good. And 5.
After leaves and before because.
Okay, let me read those last 3, just the parenthetical part. You can hear how these sentences are they're just abrupt breaks. I always thought he was romantic. My boss told me to do so, and it's certainly time. But each of those are just inserted, parentheticals, so we dash them. And some of them you could have put maybe parentheses around it. Dash is a little bit, I don't know, it's got more style than parentheses does. Okay, parentheses, number 68. Somebody want to tell me what's in the parentheses, 1 through 5? Nick Stites, thank you. Number 1. Just tell me what's inside of it.
6 feet 7.
Good. Number 2.
As soon as she learned. Or
Okay.
as she soon learned.
Okay, good. 3.
Footnote 3A.
Good. 4.
All night.
No. We got a chunk in the middle. I was ill all night. That's the main sentence. So everything in the middle, everything between that is that does it. Okay, how about 5?
Who on earth could that be?
Good. A few of those could be offset by dashes too. In fact, a few of them I would prefer dashes. Just like number 5, Hanson's doorbell. Who on earth could that be? Because I haven't finished dressing. Dashes I think would work better, but either one are okay. Okay, last one, guys, number 69. We're going to go over just the evens. Actually, I don't even think we need to go over all of them. I want to point out a few though. Look up above on page 69 at the top, where we have these sort of exceptions. Look at Keats, Charles, and Ulysses return. Whether or not you put an apostrophe S at the end of these, according to this rule, is whether or not you anticipate the sound of it. In other words, whether or not it sounds correct in your ear. So when we say Keats's poems, or Charles's work, or Ulysses' return, all of those names, Keats, Charles, and Ulysses, all end in S, right? But we treat them differently. We don't apply the rule to them the same way. For Keats, we put an apostrophe S on it. If we just say Keats' poems, it sounds like it could be some guy named Keat. Like when we say, are you going to the Beals' house? It sounds like maybe our last name is Beal. And we put the S on as a possessive. So we do the possessive S depending on how it sounds. So Ulysses, we don't want an extra S at the end of Ulysses. It would just be cumbersome. It would sound strange. Ulysses is return. Okay, when you run into that, that's when you don't add an S. Or if it's going to cause some problem in meaning, like adding an S at the end of Beals, sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's confusing. So this is one of those gray areas that it kind of depends on whether or not you're making it easier to say and understand, or whether or not you're making the meaning clear. So we're not going to get too hung up on that particular rule. I know that may have been a confusing one. Are there any that you want to go over that were confusing that you need me to talk about? I wanted to talk about 17 and 18 with the its and its, but we already did that. We ran into that in the ACT question set at the end. What about number 16? What do we do with that?
There is an apostrophe.
There is.
Between the S's.
Yeah, just between the S's. So when you make something plural, like a number or a letter, like there are, I don't know, there are 2 E's in my name, E apostrophe S. Otherwise, it's confusing as to what it is. So you're showing some separation. Normally, plurals, we only add the S. You don't do anything with an apostrophe for plurals, except in those cases. Okay. Anything else? We're good? Okay. Here's how a lot of this instruction, like with the grammar, that may have seemed kind of whirlwind, but normally if I teach this in a high school class, I would take a whole week on commas. We would unpack it like that. We don't have time to do that, which is okay because we're going to review commas every day that we're here. Right? Every time we do an ACT question set, we're going to run into commas, we're going to run into semicolons and colons, brackets, parentheses, all of those we're going to hit again and again as we work through the ACT stuff. So this is very compressed, this instruction, but that's okay. If you really feel like your head's spinning and you need to go over some of this stuff again, go to the blog, check to see the links that I've got. I'm going to try to have anything that I do in terms of PowerPoint is going to be up on YouTube, so you'll have that to look at. This will be up on YouTube, today's class. I can't imagine sitting in front of the TV and watching the whole class. You can fast forward and listen again if you need to. Okay, so it'll seem sort of very harried, very fast moving, but it is what it is. Okay, you put this away. And Charlie, will you hit the lights, please? Okay, we're going to talk real quick about the ACT. First, I want to go over what's called the rubric, the ACT grading rubric. This is how your ACT is scored. The ACT is scored on a 6-point rubric.
Oh, that's really small. The last one.
I'm not going to go over all 6 points because we don't really need to. You'll see from the 6, which is the best, the high score that you can get, to an average 3 to a 1. You can see the progression. It all kind of sounds the same and it hits some of the same things. So we'll start at the top and work down, and then I'll give you your paper. And I don't want you to freak out when you get your paper back, but just about everybody is in the 1, 2, and 3 range, which is fine. That's what I expect the first time we do the essay. The idea now is that you move up from whatever your number is now, and you just bump it up. Another thing for you perfectionists, I don't ever give 6s. I think in 12 years of teaching the ACT, I've given maybe 1 or 2 6s on essays. I mean, 6s really have to be outstanding. I think I'm a little bit harder of a grader than the ACT folks are. But just don't set your standard here because it may be unrealistic. You'll see the 6s are, I could not write a 6, I don't think, in only 30 minutes, the 30 minutes that they give you. Here's what a 6 does. The essay shows a clear understanding of the task. The essay takes a position on the issue and may offer a critical context for discussion. We'll talk about context in just a minute. The essay addresses complexity by examining different perspectives on the issue or by evaluating the implications and or complications of the issue or by fully responding to counter-arguments to the writer's position. Development of ideas is ample, specific, and logical. Most ideas are fully elaborated. A clear focus on the specific issue and the prompt is maintained. The organization of the essay is clear. The organization may be somewhat predictable, or it may grow from the writer's purpose. Ideas are logically sequenced. Most transitions reflect the writer's logic and are usually integrated into the essay. The introduction and conclusion are effective, clear, and well-developed. The essay shows good command of language, sentences are varied, and word choices are varied and precise. There are few, if any, errors to distract the reader. That's a pretty high bar. Okay, here's a 3. The essay shows some understanding of the task. The essay takes a position on the issue but does not offer a context for discussion. Most of you did not offer context for discussion because you don't know what that is yet. Some of you, a couple of you did it just sort of naturally. We'll talk about that too in a minute. The essay may acknowledge a counter-argument to the writer's position, but its development is brief or unclear. A few of you did something about counter-arguments. Development of ideas is limited and may be repetitious, with little, if any, movement between general statements and specific reasons, examples, and details. Focus on the general topic is maintained, but focus on the specific issue and the prompt may not be maintained. The organization of the essay is simple. Ideas are logically grouped within parts of the essay, but there is little or no evidence of logical sequencing of ideas. Transitions, if used, are simple and obvious. An introduction and conclusion are clearly discernible but underdeveloped. Language shows a basic control. Sentences show a little variety and word choice appropriate. Errors may be distracting and may occasionally impede understanding. Okay, and here's a 1. The essay there's actually a 0 too. So, if you got a 1, you can think, well, it's not as bad as it could be. The essay shows little or no understanding of the task. If the essay takes a position, it fails to convey reasons to support that position. The essay is minimally developed. The essay may include excessive repetition of the writer's ideas or of ideas in the prompt. Focus on the general topic is usually maintained, but focus on the specific issue in the prompt may not be maintained. There's little or no evidence of an organizational structure or of the logical grouping of ideas. Transitions are rarely used. if present, in introduction and conclusion are minimal. Sentence structure and word choice are simple. Errors may be frequently distracting and may significantly impede understanding. Okay, so this is our starting point, right? And we're going to build on it. What I want to do first, I'll give you your essays back so you can see it. Instead of getting you a new topic, we're going to rewrite this one. So we're still going to deal with gender-specific classes, and for the weekend, this is what you're going to do. All right. So, come on up and get your essay when you hear your name, and sit down. Charlie. Amy. Nick Stites. Chris Thompson. Ben. Trenton. Aline. Nick Bontrager. John Schick. Keaton. Okay, I'll let you look those over for a second. Get your blood pressure down. I did ask if they could somehow turn those things off, but I'm not sure if he knows how to do it. There's not a lot of detail. I didn't give you much feedback at all on that. If I gave you any, I just gave you a score. That's generally what I do with the baseline. This next one, we're going to sort of look at as your first attempt in doing this kind of an essay as an actual English paper. Like you're going to turn it in, it's going to be actually emailed to me, so this will be electronic, you need to type it. And I'll make all of my remarks and comments and things on the paper. What I want to get us to before I start giving you a lot of feedback is getting us up to the point where we're doing some minimal things. Organization, like 5 paragraphs, 5 or 6 paragraphs. Context, something that's called framing, which I'll explain in a minute. I'll explain context too, you probably don't know what that is. Having a clear position. A number of you sort of a little bit wishy-washy where you sort of gave me information on both sides, but you don't want to do that. You want to just attack one. Counter arguments. A couple of you dealt with counter arguments, sort of pointing out what was wrong with the other side, but you didn't maybe give enough positive arguments about what was right about your side. There were some good things that I saw. A few of you did a good job with context. Nick Bontrager, I really liked how you introduced your essay. You didn't jump right into the topic, and that's what context is going to do for us. It eases the reader into the topic. So if your first sentence was, there should not be gender-specific classes, then you don't have any context. You need to start talking about maybe gender, about what education is about, or about what the real world is about. That would be context. But I'll go into some more specific things in just a minute. Okay, so I did make a few comments on some of them. So if there is anything unclear that you need to talk to me about, do that in the class. I can clarify. Okay, what I want to do now is give you a model essay. This is not a 6 essay. It's probably a 4 or a 5. But it does do some real specific things that I'm going to point out. So you've got kind of a framework to work with. Now this is a fake prompt. This is not a prompt that you're going to use. The one you used is an actual retired ACT prompt. This one is not. Okay, come on. This also I'll have up in video form, so you can look at this again and take some more time with it. That's one right there. Hey Charlie, you can mute it. Okay. Here's the prompt that we're dealing with for this fake essay, this model essay. Some cities are considering bans on large-sized soft drinks. Do you guys hear about this?
That's not fake.
Mayor Bloomberg in New York City wants to ban anything that's 16 or bigger, I think, 16 ounces. Some consider this to be a responsible step toward public safety as it would reduce obesity. Others believe such laws to be ineffective and intrusive. In your essay, take a position on the issue. Use details and examples to support your opinion. Okay.
Oh my
God.
You
No.
wrote this essay?
No, you can't do it because this is your model essay. Sorry, you're stuck with. We can talk about the different reasons for gender-specific classrooms in a minute to help you, but no, this was taken. And you're not going to get one this easy on the ACT.
Yeah.
Okay, here's an introductory paragraph. So paragraph number 1. When you guys think of an essay, you need to be picturing 5 or 6 paragraphs. Okay, generally 5 is fine. I mean, that's usually what I would shoot for if I were writing something like this. Okay, so here's the introductory paragraph. Freedom to choose what we do with our lives is a key American ideal and has worked well for a long time. Our government's role is to protect that freedom, not to force upon us what they think is good. Notice in those first sentences, there's nothing yet about the topic. You can kind of guess that this has something to do with maybe a law or government doing something, but there's nothing about soda or New York City or banning food. We get to that later. So what we've done at the beginning is added context. Right? It hooks the reader, it makes them interested in some, like you start talking freedom, most people are like, yeah, freedom's cool. I can talk about freedom, you can tell me about freedom. And then you move to what the actual topic is. So unless there's something dangerous hidden in food, banning it is not the government's job. We all know what's in soft drinks, and we have a right to drink as much as we want. Besides, there are always ways around silly bans like these. Now we get to specifics about what the topic is and the position of the writer. This person is against the ban. Okay, the position is clear. So the intro paragraph contains context, a smooth lead into the topic, with some hints about what reasons we'll use to argue it. And there are some hints here, which we'll see in the next slide, and a clear position on the topic. Context, what the topic is, and the position. You need those 3 things in the intro paragraph. Okay, so hinted in the intro paragraph, it's not stated explicitly, but it is hinted that it's not government's job to do that sort of thing. We're responsible for making decisions like that, and that it may not work anyway. So those 3 things are going to be the 3 body paragraphs. Now, before you write an essay like this, you need to take that first few minutes and try to come up with 3 reasons. And it can be hard to come up with 3 reasons. If you can't come up with 3 reasons, 3 positive reasons on your own, you can come up with a counter argument. So you go to the other side of the position and try to find their strongest argument. What is their strongest argument for doing it? Reducing obesity. Right? That's what it is. That's why he's doing it. So you could have another paragraph, maybe a 3rd paragraph. It could be a 4th paragraph if you've come up with 3 good reasons and you want to add a counter argument, which is good. It could be a 4th paragraph. So reducing obesity, well, you just tear that apart. Like having a law in a restaurant or a store is not going to do a thing for obesity because there are ways around it, right? And if someone is eating in such a way or behaving in such a way that is causing them to be fat, they're going to keep doing that when they're not in the restaurant, when they're eating every other meal. So you could write a paragraph if you can't come up with a 3rd, if you want to use it as the 4th. Okay, here's the first paragraph. This is the first body paragraph. So this is argument number 1. First, it's not just the government's job to dictate to us how to live. For one, they're bad at it. Oftentimes, when they do force us to behave in certain ways, it backfires. For example, many are realizing now, too late for some, that the food pyramid is what's making us fat. And whose idea was that? Federal government's. Second paragraph develops the first supporting argument that government is bad at dictating behavior. Now notice also, there's a little transition. It's a real simple one. It's the word first at the beginning. It's kind of a lame transition. There are better ways to do it. But if you don't know of any better ways, that's better than nothing. So give me some sort of a transition. This next one does a little bit better of a job. And there's good reason why things backfire so often for government. Okay, that's sort of moving us from one idea to the next idea. So that acts as a transition too. It's because they're not me. So I need to read that whole thing again. And there's a good reason why things backfire so often for the government. It's because they're not me. Not that I would make better decisions for the whole country. I wouldn't. But I can make smart decisions for me. When the individual is in charge of behavior, like how much pop to drink, the individual bears the consequences of that decision, both good and bad. So the third paragraph is developing the second supporting argument that individuals make better decisions than governments do, at least for individual lives. Finally, even if such bans do go into effect, we'll just ignore them and do what we should have been doing in the first place, make our own decision. If the ban is for drinks of 16 ounces or bigger, we'll just order 2, or 3, or 4. I heard you guys talk about that. That's the obvious one, right? Restaurants, in order to please their customers, will offer free refills. And there will be a new market for cups that are 15.9 ounces. You guys ever notice that a lot of outboard motors say 9.9 on them? 9.9 horsepower, like the small motors, because they outlawed 10 horsepower motors at some point. So manufacturers are just going to make better, slightly smaller motors. It's ridiculous to think that consumers won't drink as much pop as they want to. We'll find a way. Okay, so that's the surviving paragraphs. The fourth one develops a third argument, and here's a conclusion. Conclusions can be the hardest ones to write because what I find kids want to do is they just want to repeat exactly what they said in the intro. You want to avoid it. You want to sort of revisit some of those ideas and sum up your arguments, but you want the conclusion to be its own thing. And really the last word that you leave, your grader, your ACT reader, needs to be the strongest. The government, whether it's a city like New York or our federal government, needs to stay out of things like banning foods. Dictating such behavior just doesn't work. Governments are too far removed from the situation and can't possibly know what's best for us. And even if they did, our decisions don't belong to them. Their only job is to protect our freedom, not to take it from us. Okay. Fifth paragraph concludes the essay, sums up your arguments, and leaves the reader with some last thoughtful words about the topic. Notice also the last sentence. What word do we see here and in the first sentence? I'll read it again. Their only job is to protect our freedom, not to take it from us. Freedom. The word freedom shows up here, and it shows up at the very beginning in the intro. That's called framing the essay, where you just take a word or a phrase, and it needs to be something kind of memorable, like the word freedom is a powerful, memorable word. If you can repeat it at the end, it really gives the reader of the essay a sense that the essay is of a whole. It's like it's organic. It's all one solid piece. And to have unified writing is what you're shooting for. Like this is an essay that kind of stands on its own, by itself. It's a good piece of writing that's sort of tied up with a little bow. And that little bow is the framing of it, mentioning freedom at the beginning and the end. It's an easy trick to do, guys. It has a lot of leverage because it leaves the reader thinking. The last thought that they'll have when they set your essay down is, this person has a good sense of writing a whole essay, not just stringing together paragraphs. And that's what you want. You want the overall effect because these are graded. They're not graded by machine. They're not graded with a check-off rubric type of thing. It's literally one person with a stack of essays and they're reading this as fast as they can and understand it. Which means they're grading it holistically. They're taking in the entire essay and they're, boy, that feels like a 4. You got a 4. I mean, it's very untechnical. Is that a word, Amy? Untechnical.
That's something I would say.
Okay, so if you keep that in mind, the overall goal of writing a good essay needs to be make the whole thing just, like, give it a sense of oneness, a sense of unity. Framing the essay is an easy way to do it. It's not a guaranteed way to do it, but it's one thing that you want to include. Okay, over the weekend, guys, here's what you need to do. If you're not going to go to the blog to look at this, you need to write this down. Rewrite your gender-separated classroom essay and include the following. 5 paragraphs. Let me means an intro, 2 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. If you want to try a counter argument, and you give me 6 paragraphs, great. I'm not requiring it. Some kind of transition between the big ideas. Even if they're simple, first, next, finally. If you're not sure how to do it, that may be a place to start. You can work on doing more sophisticated ones later. And transitions are just, they're helpful for the reader. You're just moving the reader from one big idea to the next so they don't get confused, so they see where you're going. Context. So don't jump right into the subject. Give me some context at the beginning. Ease me into it. Talk about something broad. What did you guys come up with? Nick, I think you did something about public education or education. At the beginning of your gender essay, what was your first sentence?
Our students' education is ultimately designed to prepare them for the real world.
Okay, good. Real world education. Those are big, broad ideas that act as good context. Anybody else do something like that where you didn't start off right when I feel like? What did you do, Amy?
The classroom should be a place where students can learn. That's how I started off.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And you might add another sentence or two after that about the importance of maybe learning having something to do with the real world, like it should be a microcosm of the real world. Because you argued against it, right?
Yeah.
Against separation. You said keep together. Okay, so that's context. Ease me into it. And then framing. Look for some word that you include at the beginning and the end. You could always do this backwards too. If you write the whole thing, you've got a good conclusion, and you like your last sentence, you can pick something from your last sentence and include it at the beginning. It doesn't necessarily have to be right at the beginning of that intro paragraph, but as close to the beginning as possible is good. And usually if you're talking about context, you're dealing with a broad idea, like maybe something about the real world. Maybe Nick can include in the very last sentence the phrase real world. Yeah, that would. Okay, is that it? That's it. So those 4 things I'll be looking for. Email it to me. There's my email. You have this in your syllabus also. Guys, you can send it. I prefer you send it as an attachment if it's just like Word, Microsoft Word. There are a few programs that I may have trouble, at least at school I do. Maybe I don't with my computer. If you're not sure, if you're writing it like on Notepad or WordPad, just paste it right into the email, and I can pull it off from that. You can try to attach it, but if you're not sure, go ahead and paste it in also. This is due Monday by midnight. Midnight Monday. Don't stay up till midnight. Get some sleep. Don't do it Sunday either. It's Lord's Day. Okay, we got about 10 minutes. Let's talk real quick about the reasons. So if you're rewriting this and you didn't come up with 3 reasons, you need to be thinking, crap, I got to come up with one more reason. So what reasons did you come up with? Let's start with the pro, with separating the genders out in the separate classes. What's good about that? A lot of you talked about distraction. We can start with that one. Right? It would eliminate distraction. Now, was it Keaton? I think Keaton did a good job of, you talked about distraction. Was it you? What? Maybe it was you, Ben.
I think so.
Talked about distraction, maybe you both did. About distraction, like sort of doing the counter argument thing. Like people say that it would eliminate distraction, but the world's full of distraction. And the opposite sex is only one kind of distraction. That's a good line of thinking to build on. You can't do a whole essay on it, but one of your body paragraphs could be that. Okay, what would be good about separating them? Okay, here's some general categories to think about when you're trying to come up with pros and cons. Anything that involves learning, like if you can argue that it's a positive for learning, try to build a paragraph on it. If you can argue that it will save money somehow, that's a good category to use. Because who's your audience? Interested adults. think of your teachers, school board members, that sort of interested adult, because remember, a lot of these are going to have to do with education. Not all of them, but you may see an education-related topic. Student learning, money, what else? Something that would benefit the community somehow. That can be helpful. Or personal well-being. But if you can argue that keeping them separated will be better for just development. Like kids, if you can argue that kids develop better separately, that would be a possible argument. Now, you can always take the opposite of these two. So if we're talking about keeping them together, it's better development. And maybe you developed a lot of that, like keeping them together is it causes them to grow and develop into human beings that will work well in the world. Now there's a lot of data that says that separating them allows the teaching to be more focused on their learning styles. Males and females tend to learn very differently. So you could use that as a reason. I'm not sure about the money. Your school district, it might actually be more expensive to separate because it gives you fewer options. So you may end up with smaller classrooms, which means you have to hire more teachers, which means it costs more money. So this might be a good one to argue against separating. Community, would it be good for the community? I mean, you guys have to sort of figure this out and come up with a way to argue. Could you argue that it would be good for the community to keep them together?
Yes.
Yeah. They would know each other better, right? They would have a better sense of community. Could you argue the other way? It'd be tricky to argue the other way for that one. Or maybe you could argue that it would be a way of keeping female roles and male roles separate so that parents can have a better say or control in how they interact. That's a stretch, but okay. Remember, you're not arguing what you believe necessarily in this essay. You're arguing whichever side is going to give you the better essay. So you have to entertain both sides. In fact, one of the things I have my high school students do is do a T-chart, right? And try to come up with three for both sides. And what you may find is, I really want this one. Like, I hate the idea of separating the genders, but I can only come up with 2 positive. But I can come up with 4 for this one over here that I don't really like. I'm going to write this essay. So you're going to write contrary to what you believe in. Sorry, that's going to happen in the SAT essay. And it's good exercise. It's good exercise. Okay, any questions on this? Anything else we've done today? Of course, no questions, because you can sense we're at the end. You just want me to end it. If somebody raised their hand, you'd be like, shut up. Michael Perry. What?
Michael Perry.
All right, if you have questions, email them to me. We're talking to you now. Okay, we're done.
That's spoken.
Charlie, can you turn off the video camera?
Meet you later.
You guys have a good weekend.
Oh my gosh. It's never ending.
It's like a nice little speaker.
It's so dumb.
It's really lost. It's like
This is real.
You